What if I told you that a 19th century psychoanalyst, chain smoking cigars in some dimly lit Vienna office, and an ancient Vedic sage meditating in absolute silence up in the Himalayas, um, basically discovered the exact same glitch in human consciousness?
I mean, it sounds like the setup to an incredibly esoteric joke, right?
Yeah.
But the punchline is essentially the entire architecture of the human mind.
Yeah.
Because those two completely different worlds, separated by thousands of years and radically different worldviews, they were looking at the exact same invisible machinery.
Right, the exact same machinery. Welcome to the Steep Dive. And if you are listening to this right now, we know exactly who you are. You are a resident learner. You're the kind of person who craves that profound, multi-perspective knowledge. But you want to skip the overwhelming academic clutter.
Absolutely. You want the insight.
You want the aha moment, the tools that actually change how you see your own life. And today's mission is arguably one of the most ambitious we have ever tackled. We are going to trace the ultimate journey of human consciousness.
This is a massive topic.
It really is. We are going straight into the mechanics of how the individual soul, what ancient texts call the jiva, how it actually migrates, takes on psychological baggage, and engages its senses across multiple lives.
And, the foundational architecture for this entire exploration comes from a remarkable stack of research compiled by Sachin Karnik. What Karnik has done here is, well, it's nothing short of a masterpiece of philosophical synthesis.
Yeah, the way he pulls it all together is just wild.
It is. The research intricately weaves together the ancient Sanskrit philosophy of the Bhagavad Gita, specifically focusing on the profound phenomenological models in chapters 15 and 2, and he bridges that with modern Western psychoanalysis. Thinkers like Sigmund Freud, Jacques Lacan, Edmund Husserl.
That is the part that completely hooked me. Because we aren't just dealing with abstract, airy theology here. The research demonstrates that the Gita offers a rigorously detailed, practically applicable map of how we actually experience reality.
Exactly, a practical map. Like, it explains why we constantly feel this underlying sense of lack and how we frantically try to fill that void with sensory experiences. And this is the craziest part to me. How our unresolved psychological baggage literally travels with us.
Right, because we so often think of ancient texts as purely dogmatic, just giving instructions on what to worship or how to behave. But Karnik's research recontextualizes the Gita as a phenomenological model.
And for anyone who isn't deep into philosophy, phenomenology is just a fancy word for the study of how things appear to our conscious experience, right?
Precisely. The sages were mapping out the exact same psychological loops, the exact same neuroses and behavioral traps that modern therapists diagnose when you sit on their couch today. The human condition, that existential ache of feeling incomplete, it's totally universal.
So let's start building this map from the ground up, because if we're going to talk about a soul migrating across lifetimes, carrying baggage and plugging into new bodies, we really have to define the core entity. Like, what is actually doing the migrating?
Right, we have to start at the source.
Because we aren't just talking about a collection of brainwaves or a personality, right? The research points to verse 15.7 of the Gita to establish the fundamental nature, the ontology of the soul.
Yes, and the text describes the individual soul using a very specific and vital Sanskrit phrase, which is mamaivaya.
Mamaivaya.
Translated. This means an eternal portion or fragment of the Supreme. And in this framework, it is crucial to understand that the soul is not a material product. It is not an emergent property of complex biological chemistry firing in the brain.
It's not just meat computing, basically.
Exactly. It is a luminous, beginningless, eternal spark of divine consciousness. It is, by its very nature, complete.
Okay, so we have this spark, this mamaivaya, which is divine and complete. But it obviously doesn't just float around in a state of untroubled, pure bliss. I mean, look at us.
Right, look out the window.
The text immediately introduces a massive complication. It says this eternal fragment becomes a living entity, a jivabhuta in the world of beings, which they call jivalok. It drops into the messy, empirical world that you and I wake up in every single morning.
And that descent into the empirical world is where all the trouble and all the drama of human existence really begins.
Yeah.
Because to interact with this physical world, the text uses a very deliberate verb. It uses the word kareti.
Kareti.
It means to draw, to drag, or to pull to itself with effort. The soul drags 6 instruments of experience from material nature, which is called priti.
And those 6 instruments being the 5 basic senses we all know, hearing, sight, touch, taste, and smell, plus the mind itself, which the text explicitly categorizes as the sixth sense.
Yeah, think about the immense psychological tension built into that single verse. You have a soul that is divine, eternal, and inherently full, yet its lived condition, its everyday reality, is one of deep, heavy entanglement.
Because it's dragging all this heavy equipment around.
Exactly. By drawing these sensory tools from material nature, this pure consciousness becomes conditioned. It has to look through the lenses of the senses and the filtering mechanism of the mind. And over time, it begins to falsely identify with the tools it's using to perceive the world.
The research refers to this process as padatmia, which translates to the false fusion of consciousness with mental modifications.
Right, false fusion.
It makes me think of putting on a highly advanced virtual reality headset. You strap this massive visor over your eyes, you put the haptic gloves on your hands, and you load up a simulation.
That is a great analogy.
Because for the first few minutes, you know you are just a person standing in a living room. But the sensory input is so overwhelming, so convincing, that soon enough, when a digital monster jumps out at you in the game, you genuinely scream. Your heart rate spikes. You completely forget the living room exists. You have fused with the avatar.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize Tadatmya. The soul forgets it is the player sitting safely on the couch and absolutely believes it is the avatar taking damage in the game. But to take your analogy further, think about the verb kadati, that act of dragging or pulling.
Yeah, pulling the senses.
The soul isn't just passively wearing the headset, it is actively magnetizing these sensory tools to itself. It gathers them around its core.
But wait, why? If the soul is this pure divine spark, why does it let itself get dragged into this heavy, sticky material mess in the first place? Why put the VR headset on and subject yourself to the stress of the simulation?
That is the ultimate paradox of embodiment. The text explains that the soul never actually loses its underlying divinity. The spark is never extinguished.
Okay.
Rather, it is covered, obscured, or filtered by what the tradition calls the gudses. The gudses are the three fundamental qualities or woven threads of material nature.
Let's break those down because they seem to be the engine driving this whole migration process. We have sattva, which is clarity, harmony, and balance.
Right.
We have rajas, which is passion, dynamic movement, and restless craving. And we have tamas, which is inertia, heaviness, and ignorance.
And so the soul, when it enters the world of beings, acts as the presider. It is the core witness. But under the heavy influence of these gusas, and specifically the passionate craving nature of rajas, it becomes utterly captivated by the game.
Because rajas is that driving force.
Exactly. Rajas is the quality that says, I need more. I am not enough as I am. I must acquire that object, achieve that status, consume that experience to feel complete.
Right.
Because the soul is peering through a mind dominated by rajas, it forgets its inherent completeness. It truly believes it is lacking something, and so it dives deeper into the material world, trying to satisfy an itch that can never be scratched by material things.
Okay, so the soul gathers these sensory tools, puts on the headset, gets completely lost in the rajasic craving of the simulation, and plays the game of a human lifetime. But the game always ends. The physical body, the hardware, eventually breaks down. Does the soul just take the headset off, remember it's divine, and return to pure bliss? Or does the game save its progress?
The game absolutely saves its progress, and often in ways we might not find entirely comforting.
Oh.
When the individual soul, acting as the Ivara, the localized controller or lord of that specific physical body, departs from an old, failing body or obtains a new one, it doesn't leave everything behind. It doesn't travel naked into the void.
So it doesn't just reboot to a factory settings blank slate.
Far from it. It takes what the tradition calls the Yogashurta, the subtle body. And this is a crucial concept. The gross physical body, the bones, the blood, the brain tissue, stays behind and decays.
That's the hardware.
Right. But the subtle body, which consists of that entire apparatus we just discussed, the mind, the intellect, the ego, and the five subtle senses, that travels with the soul.
And to explain how this invisible transfer happens, Karnik's research highlights a masterful, really poetic simile from verse 15.8. It's Vayu Ganha Niva Ashat. The soul carries these mental and sensory faculties, just as the unseen wind, the Vayu, carries fragrance gandha from its source or receptacle.
It is one of the most stunning pieces of poetic philosophy in the text.
Yeah.
I mean, you cannot see the wind, you cannot hold the wind in your hands, but when a breeze passes over a field of jasmine, it picks up the invisible essence of those flowers and carries it across a distance, depositing that scent somewhere else.
Yeah, you know it's there even if you can't grab it.
Exactly. The consciousness is the wind, and the psychological framework is the fragrance.
And Chapter 2, verse 2.22, uses a much more grounded, everyday analogy to reinforce this. It compares this process of reincarnation to a person discarding old, worn-out clothes and simply putting on new ones. As a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones.
Which fundamentally normalizes the concept of death. It removes the existential terror of annihilation. In this framework, death is merely a change of interface. It's an upgrade or a downgrade of the hardware.
But the software remains.
The software, the continuity of consciousness, remains perfectly intact. And crucially, that software carries the vasanas and saskaras.
Let's unpack those terms because they seem to be the actual scent the wind is carrying. Like, what exactly is a vasana?
Vasanas and saskaras are the deep-seated karmic imprints, the subtle memories and the behavioral tendencies we've built up over a lifetime, or honestly, many lifetimes. Every action you take, every intense desire you harbor, every trauma you endure without resolving leaves a subtle groove in the mind.
A groove.
Yeah. It's like spiritual muscle memory. The physical body dies, but those grooves, that psychological framework, travel invisibly into the next embodiment.
So if we go back to the computer analogy, it's like buying a brand new state-of-the-art laptop. The hardware is pristine, the screen is flawless, but instead of starting fresh, you take the corrupted hard drive from your old crashed computer full of malware, bad files, and chaotic folder structures, and you plug it straight into the new motherboard.
That is precisely the mechanism. The new computer is going to boot up, and within minutes, it will start experiencing the exact same glitches and crashes the old one did because the underlying software is identical.
Which brings up a really intense realization for anyone listening to this. I mean, I love the wind and fragrance metaphor because it sounds so gentle. A breeze carrying the scent of sandalwood or fresh rain. But practically speaking, if we are carrying our scents, our habits, our addictions, our deep-seated neuroses, our unhealed wounds across lifetimes, couldn't that fragrance actually be a pretty terrible stench?
Absolutely.
Are we just doomed to carry our worst psychological baggage forever?
And you've hit on the exact reason why the cycle of reincarnation, Sasora, is universally viewed in these traditions not as an exciting adventure, but as a form of profound bondage.
A trap.
A total trap. The scent you carry is your karmic momentum. It is not just a passive aroma. It is an active driving force that dictates your future reality. Unless you consciously purify these tendencies, unless you do the rigorous inner work to neutralize those saskaras, you are forcefully propelled by your own momentum into a new body and a new environment that perfectly matches your unresolved desires and traumas.
So have you ever noticed how someone might leave a toxic job to escape a terrible boss, and they move to a completely new city, start a new career, and within 6 months, they are working for someone who has the exact same toxic personality traits?
Oh, all the cock.
They attracted the exact same dynamic. The Vedic sages would say that is their karmic fragrance dictating their reality.
Because they're carrying their own customized prison with them. The environment changes, the actors change, but the script remains identical because the subtle body brought the script along.
That is heavy. Wow. Okay, so the soul has migrated. It has been blown by the wind of its own karma into a brand new body. It has plugged its old, potentially corrupted hard drive into a new biological machine, and it has set up shop. How does it actually interact with this new reality? The research takes us to verse 15.9, which explores the soul's sensory engagement through what it calls the 6 gates of experience.
Right, so once embodied, the text says the soul presides over, and the Sanskrit term is atehya, the specific sensory channels. It takes charge of hearing, sight, touch, taste, and smell. And all of these 5 external gates are coordinated and synthesized by the mind, the manas, which acts as the central processor, the 6th gate.
And through these 6 gates, the soul consumes or enjoys, the verb is upasivate, the sense objects of the material world, which are known as vyayas.
Yes, and Karnik's research connects this beautifully to the broader, overarching allegory used in Chapter 15 of the Gita. The entire chapter opens with the image of a massive, inverted cosmic tree.
The banyan tree.
The banyan tree, exactly, with its roots upward and its branches pointing downward into the material world. In that incredibly vivid metaphor, the sense objects, the vyayas, are described as the tender shoots or buds sprouting on the branches of the tree. They're constantly blooming, constantly luring the mind outward, begging to be consumed.
And this is where the research gets incredibly granular. It maps out a very specific psychological sequence of entanglement. It doesn't just say, you see a thing and you want it. It breaks down the exact mechanism, almost like a slow-motion replay of how we trap ourselves.
A frame-by-frame analysis.
Yeah, it goes like this. Contact occurs. Sensation arises. Memory recognizes. Evaluation labels. Desire seeks. Attachment forms. Action is taken. Karmic consequences generated.
To really understand the gravity of that sequence, we need to slow it down and trace a single relatable impulse through those 8 steps, because we do this thousands of times a day without noticing.
Right. Let's use something incredibly mundane but powerful. Let's say you are walking down the street, totally lost in thought, and you pass by a bakery. Step 1. Contact. The invisible molecules of freshly baked croissants waft through the air and make physical contact with the olfactory receptors in your nose. The gate of smell is breached.
Step 2. Sensation arises. The physical contact is translated into a neurological signal. You register a scent. At this microsecond, it is still neutral. It's just data.
Step 3. Memory recognizes. The central processor, the mind, accesses its massive database of past experiences. It matches this new scent data with a file from 10 years ago. You know, a memory of sitting in a warm cafe in Paris, feeling totally relaxed and happy, eating a buttery pastry.
And then step 4, evaluation kicks in. The mind doesn't just recognize the data, it judges it. It slaps a label on it. Pleasant, desirable, good. The tender shoot on the cosmic tree has caught your eye.
Step 5. Desire seeks. This is the pivot point. Suddenly, you aren't just a person walking down the street. You feel a profound sense of lack. You actually need that croissant to recreate the feeling of happiness from Paris. The rajasic energy surges.
Which brings us to step 6, attachment forms. The desire solidifies. If the bakery has a sign that says closed, you don't just walk away unbothered. You feel a spike of genuine frustration or anger. Your emotional well-being is now actively hostage to the availability of the pastry.
Step 7. Action is taken. You walk into the bakery, pull out your wallet, and buy it. You consume it.
And finally, step 8, karmic consequence is generated. By acting on the craving, you reinforce the neural pathway. You deepen the groove in the subtle body. You ensure that the next time you smell a bakery, the compulsion to stop will be even stronger. The scent in the wind gets a little bit heavier.
When you lay it out like that, it sounds terrifying. We are like biological robots running on these ancient scripts. A sense object is never just neutral, it becomes psychologically charged, fueling that passionate, craving rajas.
Exactly. We lose our agency without even realizing it.
It feels like we are handed a state-of-the-art smartphone when we were born, but instead of us using the apps, the senses, to navigate the world, the apps are using us to endlessly doom scroll through physical reality, clicking on every single notification.
The interface has completely hijacked the user. The soul thinks it is in control, but is actually being yanked around on a leash by its own sensory apparatus.
But wait, I have to play devil's advocate here for a second. Is the text actually suggesting that enjoying a good meal, or being moved to tears by a beautiful piece of music, or hugging someone you love, is inherently a trap? Are we supposed to walk through the world like unfeeling zombies, completely numb to the tender shoots of the tree?
I am so glad you brought that up, because that is one of the most common and frankly most tragic misunderstandings of this philosophy. The trap is not the experience itself. The croissant is not evil. The music is not a sin.
Okay, phew.
The trap is the saga, the attachment, and the false identification with the experience.
Ah, the VR headset analogy again.
Exactly. The soul forgets that it is the eternal, undisturbed witness and mistakenly believes it is the enjoyer. When you think you are the enjoyer, you chain your ultimate happiness, your core sense of self, to permanent things.
Right, things that fade.
And because material things are governed by time, the meal ends, the music stops, the people we love pass away, you are inevitably left with a void. That void generates the craving to repeat the experience, to fill the lack. It is the attachment that causes suffering, not the sensory input itself.
Endlessly driven by craving, constantly trying to fill an existential void, repeating the same sensory mistakes over and over. This leads us directly into the most fascinating synthesis of Karnik's research. Because this ancient Vedic description of the human condition sounds virtually identical to the foundational texts of modern psychology.
This is where the research bridges a massive historical and cultural gap, bringing Eastern metaphysics into direct conversation with Western psychoanalysis. Let's look at Sigmund Freud, the architect of modern therapy. The Gita's concept of carrying unresolved karmic impressions, the vasanas traveling like a fragrance across lifetimes and forcing you to act out old scripts. It maps with shocking precision onto Freud's concept of the compulsion to repeat, or the repetition compulsion.
Yeah, Freud observed this phenomenon in trauma victims, particularly soldiers returning from World War I, right?
Exactly, the shell-shock veterans.
He noticed that they didn't just passively remember their trauma, they unconsciously recreated the conditions of it in their current lives. They would provoke arguments, sabotage relationships, or seek out dangerous situations that mirrored their original wounding.
And Freud realized that humans are bound by forces and structures of repetition that operate entirely beneath our conscious control. We are driven to act out the same patterns, seeking a resolution that never comes. The invisible scent of unresolved trauma, in the Freudian model, functions exactly like a karmic imprint. It forces the hardware to crash the same way.
Karnik's research also heavily features Jacques Lacan, the highly influential French psychoanalyst. And Lacan's theories map onto the Yida's specific listing of the senses, in verse 15.9, hearing, sight, touch, etc., in a really profound way.
Right, Lacan proposed the theory of partial drives. He argued that human desire isn't a unified, holistic thing. It is fundamentally fragmented across different sensory channels. He specifically linked human drives to the gaze, to the voice, to the oral impulse.
Which perfectly parallels the Gita's breakdown of the soul consuming the world through fragmented, isolated gates.
Exactly.
So because desire is fragmented, it can never reach total satisfaction. The eye is never satisfied with seeing, the ear is never satisfied with hearing. You can't fill an existential spiritual void by just looking at beautiful things or eating delicious food, because the drive is only partial. It's like trying to fill a bucket that has 6 different holes in the bottom.
That's a perfect image for it. Which brings in the phenomenological perspective of thinkers like Rudolf Burnett and Edmund Husserl, who are also cited in the research. They conceptualize drive not as a search for pleasure, but as a forceful, relentless striving that is born entirely out of a felt lack or privation.
You feel a hole inside you, an emptiness, so you are violently driven to fill it with external objects.
And this phenomenological definition of lack matches with stunning precision the Gurdjieff's concept of kama, or craving desire. The diagnosis is identical across millennia. The human subject is split, fragmented, and driven by an endless, unfulfillable loop of desire. Both the ancient meditating sages and the modern psychoanalysts agree that the finite mind cannot possibly achieve permanent equilibrium through material objects. The math just doesn't work.
Okay, let's pause and really look at this. Lacan, Freud, and the ancient Vedic sages are essentially standing in a circle, looking at the human brain, and entirely agreeing that we are a tragic mess of fragmented desires, doomed to repeat our traumas. But here's the massive friction point. Don't they completely disagree on the solution?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, Freud famously stated that the ultimate goal of psychoanalysis is just to help us manage our neuroses so we can transform hysterical misery into, like, common unhappiness. He just wants us to cope with the glitch. But the Get It isn't offering a coping mechanism, is it? It is promising a total escape, ultimate liberation.
You've zeroed in on the exact point of divergence. The diagnosis is shared, but the resolutions are radically fundamentally different. Psychoanalysis generally offers what Freud called Durcharbeiten, or working through. It's a pragmatic negotiation. The goal is to understand your drives, mitigate the worst of the repetition compulsion, and learn to function relatively peacefully within society.
Managing the symptoms of the matrix, essentially, making the prison cell a little more comfortable.
Right. It's adjusting the VR headset so it doesn't give you a headache. Whereas the Gedi demands absolute transcendence. It argues that coping is insufficient because the game itself is fundamentally flawed.
It's rigged.
It is rigged. It says you must cut down that entire cosmic tree of attachment. Verse 15.3 explicitly calls for using the Asoga Shastra, the strong, unyielding sword of detachment. The goal isn't to be a well-adjusted player in the game. The goal is to exit the simulation entirely and reach the supreme person, the Puruttama.
Which brings us to a massive glaring roadblock in human experience. If we're all caught in this cycle of migration, if we are all fragmented by our senses, carrying this unseen karmic baggage that dictates our lives, why don't we realize it? Why do we walk around completely blind to our own machinery? The research points to verses 15.10 and 15.11, which describe a profound epistemic gap, two completely different ways of seeing reality.
The text draws a very stark, uncompromising line here. It states that the deluded, the Vimuika, completely fail to see the soul as it goes through its phases. They're utterly blind to the underlying reality. They don't see the continuous thread of consciousness when it departs the body at death. They don't see it when it stays in the body during life. And they don't see it when it is actively enjoying the senses under the influence of the gunas.
So the Vimutha only see the physical body. They see the flesh, the blood, the bank account, the social status. They mistake the hardware for the user.
Precisely. They are entirely captivated by the surface level of existence. But in sharp contrast, those who possess the Janakakas, the eye of knowledge, perceive the underlying consciousness. They see the reality of the soul's movement. They see the wind carrying the fragrance.
And Karnik's research emphasizes that this jhana kakas is not a physical organ. It's not like you meditate for 10 years and suddenly grow a third eyeball on your forehead.
Right, no extra anatomy.
It is an intuitive spiritual insight. The Sanskrit term often associated with this is prajna, a deep, penetrating wisdom.
Because the physical biological eye is only capable of seeing multiplicity in form. It sees a tree, a car, a person. It sees the surface differences. But the eye of knowledge sees dependence and continuity. It sees the eternal thread of consciousness running through all the constantly changing forms. Ignorance, or moha, is the glue that binds us to the empirical, surface-level reality, preventing us from opening that inner eye.
Let's go back to our video game metaphor. The deluded person, the Vingha, looks at the screen and thinks the pixels, the digital buildings, and the avatar are all that exists in the universe. They think if the avatar's health bar drops to 0, the universe fundamentally ends.
Yeah, it's all very literal to them.
But the person who has developed the eye of knowledge looks at the exact same screen and sees the underlying code. They see the ones and zeros generating the illusion. They see the player holding the controller outside the game.
That is an exceptionally clear way to conceptualize the epistemic gap. They are looking at the exact same world, but perceiving entirely different realities. And verse 15:11 goes on to explain a crucial caveat about who actually gets to see this code. It says that yogis who strive inwardly, who apply rigorous internal discipline, see the soul established within themselves.
But, and this is a massive but for modern spiritual seekers, the verse adds that those who lack inner refinement, the akaramana, even if they strive externally, they remain blind to it. Meaning, you can go through all the external motions of religion, you can read all the self-help books, you can do yoga poses for 3 hours a day, but if you haven't refined your inner awareness, you won't see the code.
Because mere external activity, mechanical ritual, is insufficient. Without cultivating a stable inner awareness, calmness, and the power of discrimination between what is eternal and what is temporary, the mind remains too turbulent. A turbulent lake cannot reflect the moon. Only a still mind can reflect the truth of the soul.
I hear that, and part of me feels inspired, but another part of me feels incredibly frustrated. Practically speaking, how do you actually read the code in daily life? I don't want to just sit on a mountaintop meditating for 40 years to still the league of my mind. I live in the modern world. I have a demanding job. I have a family. I have a smartphone buzzing in my pocket right now. How do we apply this profound philosophy to a Tuesday morning commute?
That is the most important question you could ask, because the Gita is ultimately not a manual for retreating to a cave. It was spoken on a battlefield. It is a manual for dynamic action in the midst of chaos. It provides a highly practical alchemy for rewiring our senses.
Which brings us to the ultimate actionable takeaway of this deep dive. How do we apply the eye of knowledge to our sensory gates right now?
The absolute foundation of this practical application is a concept introduced early in the text, in Chapter 2. The word is samatvam, which translates to equanimity. It is defined as the practice of remaining balanced in success, siddhi, and failure, asiddhi.
But to be very clear, because the research notes this specifically, samatvam is not passive apathy. You aren't just deadening your emotions and becoming a robot who doesn't care if they get promoted or fired or if they win or lose.
No, true equanimity is a highly active, resilient cognitive shift. Samatvam is the intentional, conscious uncoupling of your inner well-being from external validation. It means you stop letting the chaotic, unpredictable external world dictate your internal weather. When you win, you don't inflate with ego. When you lose, you don't collapse in despair. You maintain your center as the witness.
And once you establish that baseline of equanimity, you can begin to practice what Karnik outlines in the research as the 5-gate discipline. We spent a lot of time talking about how the senses act like a gravity well, pulling the mind outward and downward into worldly entanglement, chasing those tender shoots of the cosmic tree. This discipline is about intentionally rerouting the senses so they point upward toward higher awareness, rather than downward into craving. Let's walk through these gates one by one and really ground them in modern reality. Let's start with hearing.
For the gate of hearing, the modern default is to let the ear passively consume whatever noise is in the environment. Idle gossip in the office, toxic news cycles, the endless chatter of anxiety.
They're just a wall of sound.
Right. The discipline requires swapping that out for actively listening to wisdom or shavana. You intentionally curate your auditory diet. You listen to podcasts that elevate you. You engage in conversations that matter. You listen to silence.
Next is sight. I think this one is the most violently abused gate in our modern era.
Without a doubt.
The default is to let our eyes feast on things that stoke envy and rejessic craving. Mindlessly scrolling social media, looking at lives we don't have, bodies we don't have, things we can't afford. The discipline here is darshana. You curate your screens and your physical environments to recall higher truths. You look at art that inspires you, you read texts that challenge you, you look at the people around you with a gaze of compassion rather than judgment.
Then we have touch. The default mode of touch in a materialistic framework is acquisition. Grasping at things, seeking physical comfort, taking. The discipline transforms touch into service, or siva. You put your hands to work for others. You engage in cleaning, caring for someone who is sick, repairing what is broken. Doing the dishes mindfully for your family isn't just a chore. In this framework, it is an act of consecration.
Wow, that reframes everything.
Embodiment becomes an offering rather than a mechanism for taking. You are literally wielding the sword of detachment in the sink.
Taste. The default is eating as a compulsion, scrolling on your phone while shoving food in your mouth, or eating purely for sensory indulgence to fill an emotional void. The discipline is adopting a prasada regimen. You eat moderately, you eat foods that promote sattva, clarity, and you eat with deep, conscious gratitude. You turn the base animal appetite into a form of spiritual communion.
And finally, smell. This ties directly back to our central metaphor of the wind and the fragrance. The discipline of smell is about sanctifying your space. You use fresh air or light incense, not just to make a room smell nice, but to subtly cue your nervous system toward composure. You honor the Vayugandha metaphor by consciously choosing the literal and energetic fragrance of the environment you inhabit.
I find this entirely empowering. The goal isn't to shut the gates to the castle, barricade the doors, and hide in the dark away from the world. The goal is to act as a much more discerning, conscious bouncer for what comes in and out of those gates. We aren't suppressing the senses, we are consecrating them. We are elevating their purpose.
And this is the inner alchemy of karma yoga. You use the sattva gun, that quality of clarity, light, and harmony, as a stable platform. You build a life of sattva so that you can eventually step off that platform and achieve a sauga, or true ultimate detachment. You continue to act dynamically in the world. You work, you love, you create, but you are no longer bound by the sticky karmic residue of your actions.
But I have to ask the hard question, the one everyone listening is probably thinking. It is very easy to be a good bouncer at the gates of your senses when the crowd is calm. It's easy to be equanimous when you get a slight pay cut or someone cuts you off in traffic. How on earth do we maintain this equanimity when life inevitably throws a massive, devastating curveball? When real tragedy strikes? When someone we love dies? Or we face a terrifying diagnosis?
The ancient texts offer a very specific, subtle grammatical clue to answer that exact fear. Equanimity, samatvam, is described as being attained through the Sanskrit jaran bhujva. That word translates to having become.
Having become, meaning it is a process, not a switch you flip.
Exactly. It is an active, grueling, moment-to-moment practice. You do not simply decide to be equanimous once and you're done for life. Every single time you choose balance during a minor, insignificant win or a tiny loss on a random Tuesday, you are actively rewriting your karmic code. You are changing the internal fragrance that your soul will carry forward.
So it builds over time.
Right. When the massive, life-shattering curveballs come, you don't magically summon peace out of nowhere. You rely entirely on the spiritual muscle memory you have built through 1,000 tiny daily choices of equanimity. You survive the storm because you spent years fortifying the foundation in good weather.
That is incredibly profound. Okay, we need to wrap up this absolute epic of an exploration. We have traced the vast, sweeping journey of the jiva. We saw it originate as a luminous, complete, divine spark, only to descend and become entangled in the heavy, complex gravity of material nature, putting on the VR headset of the senses.
We watched it migrate on the invisible winds of karma, carrying the subtle baggage of its past actions, its unhealed traumas, and its deep cravings, like a fragrance moving from one physical form to the next.
We explored how it sets up shop in a brand new body, experiencing reality through the fragmented, craving gates of the senses. A diagnosis of human lack and repetition that is shared by ancient meditating yogis and modern psychoanalysts like Freud and Lacan alike.
But most importantly, we uncovered the solution. We saw that true freedom isn't found by escaping the world, suppressing our desires, or shutting down our senses. True freedom is found by opening the eye of knowledge, actively practicing equanimity in the face of success and failure, and consecrating our daily mundane actions so that our sensory gates point upward toward truth, rather than dragging us downward into the mud of craving.
The knowledge in these texts, illuminated by Karnik's incredible research, isn't just academic theology to be debated in a classroom. It is a highly practical, urgent toolkit for navigating the human mind.
It is the ultimate operator's manual for consciousness.
And to you, our listener, this is where the theory ends and your actual life begins. The next time you feel relentlessly driven by a sudden, inexplicable desire, the next time you feel totally overwhelmed by a sensory input, whether it's a notification popping up on your phone, a wave of anxiety, or the smell of a bakery drawing you in, you can use this toolkit. You don't have to be a victim to the sequence. You can pause. You can step back into the seat of the presider. You can observe the incredibly complex machinery of your own mind at work, and you can choose not to be crushed by its gears.
You can realize, in that very moment, that you are the eternal witness, not the fleeting emotion.
We want to leave you with one final, lingering thought to chew on as you go about the rest of your day. The texts tell us, with absolute poetic certainty, that your soul carries its deeply ingrained tendencies into the future, exactly the way the invisible wind carries a scent from a flower. Every single thing you think, every desire you harbor, and every action you take is actively adding to that aroma. So as you finish this deep dive and step back into your life, ask yourself, what kind of fragrance are you brewing in the laboratory of your mind right now?